My daughter's boyfriend laughed at my house, not knowing I owned his father's company. The faint, familiar scent of old paper and brewing coffee hung in the air of my living room, a comforting aroma that had defined my home for 2 decades. It was a scent of quiet contentment, of a life lived simply and deliberately. But that evening, it felt different, charged with a nervous energy I hadn't anticipated. My daughter, the center of my world, was bringing her boyfriend home for the first time, and the weight of that introduction settled heavily in my chest. I am a 52-year-old man, and I never imagined that a single 20-minute conversation was about to detonate the foundations of my relationship with my daughter and teach a spoiled brat named Brett the most brutal lesson of his young life. My daughter, Sarah, had come home last Tuesday, her face lit with the kind of incandescent glow that only young love can produce. She'd been talking about Brett for 8 months, her voice filled with a breathless admiration that I, as her father, found both endearing and slightly concerning. She spoke of his charm, his confidence, his family's affluence, but she'd been strangely vague on the details of his character. Now, I was about to meet him, and a primal paternal instinct had my senses on high alert. The moment Brett stepped over the threshold of my modest, 3-bedroom house, I saw it. It wasn't just a glance. It was a full-body appraisal, a swift, contemptuous scan that stripped the warmth from the room. His eyes, the color of cold steel, flickered over our living room, cataloging every perceived flaw with visible disdain. He took in the second-hand sofa. Its floral pattern faded from years of sunlight and shared stories, the sturdy oak coffee table I'd bought at a flea market, and my prized collection of paperback novels lining the built-in shelves. His gaze lingered on them as if he were surveying a crime scene, a place where good taste had been violently murdered. I saw the subtle curl of his lip, the almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw. He was judging my life, my choices, my very worth, all within the span of 10 seconds. Sarah, bless her heart, seemed oblivious, her hand tucked happily into the crook of his arm. She was lost in her own bubble of excitement, unable or unwilling to see the condescension radiating from the young man beside her. We sat down for dinner, the scent of the roast chicken I'd painstakingly prepared filling the small dining area. I made her favorite, hoping to create a bridge of familiarity and comfort. I tried to make conversation, to breach the wall of judgment Brett had erected around himself. I asked him about his studies in business administration, a field I knew a thing or two about. I inquired about his plans after graduation, the usual, innocuous questions a father asks the young man dating his daughter. His answers were monosyllabic, dismissive grunts delivered between glances at his phone. The screen of his device glowed with a constant stream of notifications, each one seemingly more important than the man sitting across from him. He would type out a quick reply, a smirk playing on his lips, and then make small, disparaging comments under his breath. I caught fragments, unbelievable, so rustic, can't even get a signal. Words that my daughter either genuinely didn't hear over her own cheerful chatter or, more painfully, chose to ignore. The tension in the room was a living thing, a coiled serpent sitting at the center of the table, and I felt its suffocating presence with every passing minute. The moment that irrevocably changed, everything arrived with the clearing of the dinner plates. I stood up, stacking the dishes with practiced efficiency, a simple domestic chore I'd performed thousands of times. It was then that Brett, leaning back in his chair with an air of insufferable superiority, decided to detonate the evening. "You know," he began, his voice dripping with a syrupy, patronizing tone, "Sarah's life is going to be so different once we get serious. She really deserves so much better than this." He made a sweeping gesture with his hand, a dismissive flick of the wrist that encompassed my kitchen, my home, my entire existence. The disdain in that simple movement was a physical blow. I paused, my hands gripping the warm ceramic plates, and forced myself to remain calm. My heart was pounding a furious rhythm against my ribs, a war drum of parental rage. But I kept my back to him, focusing on the rhythmic sound of running water as I rinsed the plates. I could feel the tension in the room spike, the air crackling with unspoken words. He wasn't finished. Emboldened by my silence, he went on, his voice gaining a smug, lecturing quality. He spoke of his family's money, real money, as he put it, as if it were a measure of their inherent virtue. He painted a glittering future for Sarah, a life filled with designer clothes I couldn't pronounce, lavish European vacations I'd only seen in magazines, and a sprawling mansion in a gated community. A lifestyle, he proclaimed, befitting someone of her undeniable beauty and intelligence. The implication was as sharp and clear as a shard of glass. I was holding her back. My simple life was a cage from which he, the gallant prince, would rescue her. A cold, quiet anger began to solidify in my gut. I turned off the faucet, the sudden silence amplifying the audacity of his words. I turned to face him, wiping my hands on a dish towel, my expression carefully neutral. "And what is it that you do for work, Brett?" I asked, my voice even, betraying none of the storm raging inside me. I was genuinely curious how a 23-year-old had managed to accumulate the kind of wealth he was boasting about. He laughed. It wasn't a warm, pleasant sound. It was a short, sharp bark of derision, as if I'd asked the most absurd question in the world. "Work?" he scoffed, shaking his head in disbelief. "I don't need to work. My father takes care of everything." He said it with such casual arrogance, such an absolute lack of self-awareness, that it momentarily stunned me. He spoke of his father's high-paying corporate job as if it were his own personal achievement, the source of a trust fund that funded his son's indolent and lavish existence. And that's when he made his gravest, most unforgivable mistake. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine with an unnerving intensity, and delivered the final, fatal insult. "So, you don't need to worry about Sarah anymore," he said, his voice low and conspiratorial, as if he were doing me a favor. "I'll be taking care of her from now on." The sheer, unadulterated arrogance in his voice, the galling assumption that I was somehow failing as a father, the profound disrespect for the man whose home he was a guest in, it all coalesced into a single, white-hot point of rage. It was a direct challenge, a dismissal of my entire life's work, not just as a businessman, but as a parent. I held his gaze for a long moment, the silence stretching taut between us. I let him bask in what he clearly perceived as his victory. Then I offered a small, thin smile. "Good luck with that," I replied, the words soft but edged with steel. My daughter, Sarah, finally seemed to register the oppressive atmosphere. She shifted uncomfortably in her chair, a flicker of unease crossing her face, but she said nothing. Her silence was the deepest cut of all. After they left, a whirlwind of awkward goodbyes and forced smiles, I sat alone in my kitchen for a long, long time. The house felt unnaturally quiet, the lingering scent of roast chicken now seeming like a mockery of the family meal I had hoped for. The disrespect from Brett stung, a raw, open wound on my pride. But it was my daughter's silence that truly haunted me, echoing in the stillness of the room. Had I raised her so poorly that she would stand by and watch someone systematically dismantle her father's dignity? Had my quiet, unassuming life made her believe I was weak, someone not worth defending? The questions churned in my mind, a bitter cocktail of hurt and self-doubt. Did she see me through his eyes now? A simple, struggling man in a simple, struggling house? The thought was a dagger to my heart. I had worked my entire life to provide for her, to give her a foundation of values I believed were more important than material wealth. Was it possible that I had failed so completely that she'd chosen a man who looked down on everything I had painstakingly built and stood for? The next morning, fueled by a sleepless night and a potent mix of anger and determination, I did something I rarely do. I sat at my worn oak desk, opened my laptop, and decided to delve into the life of this young man's father. It didn't take long. A quick search on LinkedIn, and there he was, a polished corporate headshot, a list of professional achievements, and his current title. Regional Sales Director at a mid-sized manufacturing company. It was a respectable position, certainly one that afforded a comfortable life and a good salary. It was nothing spectacular, not the kind of wealth that Brett's boasting had implied, but more than enough to spoil a son who had clearly never learned the value of a dollar earned through his own sweat and effort. As I scanned his profile, the company name snagged my attention. It felt familiar, a faint bell ringing in the back of my mind. I swiveled in my chair, pulling open the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. My fingers, calloused from years of both manual labor and boardroom negotiations, flipped through the files until I found what I was looking for. And there it was in black and white. The reason the name was so familiar. They were one of our vendors. Not a massive account, but a consistent one. They've been supplying specialized components to my company for the past 3 years. And listed as our main contact for the last 18 months was none other than Brett's father. It's here that I should explain something fundamental about myself. When people look at my life, my modest house, my 10-year-old truck, my secondhand furniture, my penchant for used books, they make assumptions. They're the exact same assumptions that my daughter's arrogant boyfriend made. They see a man who is struggling, just getting by, a man to be pitted or worse, dismissed. They couldn't be more wrong. 25 years ago, I was a young man with a powerful idea and a fire in my belly. I started a small manufacturing business in the cramped, dusty confines of my garage. My life became a relentless cycle of work. I worked 18-hour days, fueled by cheap coffee and unwavering self-belief. I slept on a cot in my makeshift office, the smell of machine oil and hot metal my constant companions. Every single penny I earned, every ounce of profit, was reinvested directly back into the company. I was a ghost at social gatherings, a stranger to vacations. While my peers were buying bigger houses, driving fancier cars, and climbing the corporate ladder at established firms, I was building something from the ground up, something that was mine, something that I knew deep in my bones would last. Today, that small garage business has grown beyond my wildest dreams. My company, a name recognized and respected throughout the industry, employs over 200 people. We generate 8 figures in annual revenue, a number that still feels surreal to the young man who once counted his pennies to afford raw materials. I own the sprawling factory building, the state-of-the-art equipment within it, and I have enough money in the bank to retire to a private island tomorrow if I so desired. But I don't. I still live in the same house where I brought Sarah home from the hospital because it's not just a structure of wood and nails. It's our home, imbued with a lifetime of memories. I still drive my 10-year-old truck because it runs perfectly and its purpose is to get me from one place to another, not to broadcast my net worth. I still buy my books used because a story's value isn't diminished by a creased spine or a previous reader's notes in the margin. I never flaunted my success. It felt crass, a betrayal of the humble origins from which I came. I raised my daughter to understand the value of hard work, integrity, and humility. I wanted her to judge people by the content of their character, not the size of their wallets. Apparently, I had succeeded far too well. In my quest to instill these values, I had created a blind spot. Even she, my own daughter, had no real concept of the scale of what I had built. She saw the simple father, not the successful CEO. The morning after that disastrous dinner, after uncovering the connection to Brett's father, I walked into my office with a newfound, icy resolve. I called an emergency meeting with my procurement team. They gathered in the conference room, their faces a mixture of curiosity and concern at the unscheduled summons. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I got straight to the point. I informed them that we would be terminating our contract with Brett's father's company, effective immediately. A ripple of surprise went through the room. My head of procurement, a sharp woman I'd worked with for over a decade, asked the inevitable question, why? I gave them the corporate-sanctioned reason, a partial truth that was both legitimate and defensible. I explained that we were streamlining our operations, consolidating vendors to improve efficiency and reduce costs. It was a sound business decision. We had other suppliers, larger and more reliable ones, who could provide the same components at more competitive prices. We had been considering this move for months, but Brett's spectacular display of arrogance had just provided the final, decisive push. The official termination letter, drafted by our legal team, went out that afternoon via courier. I signed it without a moment's hesitation. I didn't think about it again, pushing the matter to the back of my mind as I focused on the myriad other demands of running my business. That is until Friday. My phone rang late in the afternoon, and I saw Sarah's picture flash on the screen. I answered, expecting her usual cheerful update on her week. Instead, I was met with the sound of choked sobs. She was crying, her voice thick with distress. She told me that Brett's father had been fired from his job that morning. According to Brett, the loss of our company's contract had been the final straw for a company that was already struggling and looking for excuses to downsize. The termination had made him look incompetent, directly responsible for losing a long-standing client. Her boyfriend was, she said, completely devastated. His father, in a fit of rage and panic, had immediately cut off his allowance, canceled his credit cards, and told him to get a job and start contributing to the now precarious family finances. The comfortable rug of privilege had been violently yanked out from under him. Then came the question I had been subconsciously dreading. My daughter, her voice trembling, asked if there was anything I could do to help. She spoke of the family's sudden and dire financial struggles, of how terrible she felt seeing Brett so distraught and helpless. I listened patiently, my heart aching for her, but my resolve unwavering. I told her I was sorry to hear about their troubles, my tone carefully sympathetic but non-committal. I did not elaborate. I did not confess. I let the silence hang between us, a new and uncomfortable chasm. That weekend, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Brett standing on my porch alone. The transformation was startling. Gone was the arrogant, preening young man who had dismissed my life with a wave of his hand just a few days earlier. The designer clothes looked rumpled. His hair was unkempt, and his eyes, stripped of their usual arrogance, were shadowed with desperation. He looked haggard, lost, a boy forced to confront the harsh realities of the world for the very first time. He mumbled an apology for his behavior at dinner, the words sounding foreign and clumsy on his tongue. He asked if we could talk. I stepped aside, inviting him in. The irony was thick as I offered him a cup of coffee, and he sank into the very same armchair from which he had passed judgment on my home. This time, however, he seemed to see it differently. The second-hand furniture no longer looked like a symbol of poverty, but perhaps one of stability. He told me the whole story, his voice cracking with a mixture of fear and disbelief. His father had been fired. The family was facing a mountain of debt and serious financial problems. He had no idea what to do, where to turn. His entire world, propped up by his father's income, had crumbled in the space of a day. Then he made his plea. He said he'd done some frantic research on local companies, trying to find potential leads for his father. In his searching, he discovered that I, the simple man in the modest house, was the owner of one of the larger and more respected manufacturing operations in the entire state. The realization had clearly shocked him. He wondered, his voice now laced with a desperate, cloying humility, if I might know someone in the industry who might be hiring. He was asking me, the man he had openly disdained, to use my influence to save his family. To save him. I listened to his entire, rambling request without interruption. I let him finish, let him lay his desperation bare. When he was done, a hopeful, expectant silence filled the room. I told him I'd think about it and get back to him. He left looking visibly relieved, a flicker of his old confidence returning. He probably thought he had successfully humbled himself, that he had masterfully played the part of the penitent young man before the simple, kind-hearted father of the girl he was dating. He had no idea. He had absolutely no idea what was coming. Shortly after Brett left my house, my phone rang. It was Sarah. Her voice was light, buoyant with an excitement that twisted a knot in my stomach. She was convinced I was going to help Brett's family. She gushed about how grateful Brett was that I'd been willing to listen, how he'd confessed to her that he had realized how wrong he had been about me. She painted a picture of a romantic hero who had learned a valuable lesson in humility. It would mean so much to our relationship if you could help, Dad, she said, her voice filled with earnest hope. Her words, meant to be endearing, felt like a manipulation, a carefully constructed appeal to my fatherly love. The conversation gave me the opening I needed. I asked her a question that had been eating away at me since that awful Tuesday night. Sarah, I began, my voice softer than I intended. I need you to tell me something honestly. When Brett was here for dinner, when he insulted our home and dismissed my ability to provide for you, why didn't you say anything? There was a pause on the other end of the line, a silence so profound I could hear her breathing. Her answer, when it finally came, shattered my heart into a million pieces. I was embarrassed, she whispered, the confession so quiet I could barely hear it. My mind reeled. I assumed she meant she was embarrassed by his behavior, by his rudeness. But she quickly corrected me. No, she had been embarrassed by us, by our house, by our lifestyle, by our apparent lack of money. In the 8 months she had been dating Brett, she had been granted a passport into a different world, a world of casual luxury and effortless wealth. She had seen how the other half lived, and the experience had tainted her perception of her own life. She had started to see our comfortable, loving home through Brett's cold, judgmental eyes, and she had found it wanting. My simple, deliberate choices had become a source of shame for her. That conversation stretched for 2 agonizing hours. I didn't yell. I didn't lecture. Most importantly, I didn't reveal the truth about my company or my role in her boyfriend's father's unemployment. Instead, I asked her questions. I asked her about her values, about what qualities she believed made a person worthy of respect. I asked her if she truly believed that money was the most important measure of a person's success. Her answers were not what I'd hoped to hear. They were filled with the half-formed, materialistic philosophies of a young woman who had been seduced by the glittering facade of wealth without understanding the foundation upon which it was built or the character required to sustain it. It was one of the most painful conversations of my life. The following Monday, my phone rang again. It was Brett. He said he'd been thinking about our conversation and wanted to know if I'd had a chance to consider his request. His tone was eager, a little impatient. I told him that I had indeed been thinking a great deal about it, and I asked if he could come by the house again that evening. He agreed immediately. He arrived at 6 o'clock sharp, his anxiety palpable beneath a thin veneer of forced composure. I repeated the ritual from his last visit, offering him the same coffee, and we sat in the same chairs in my living room. This time, however, the pretense of a friendly chat was gone. Before I can even consider helping your family, Brett, I began, my voice firm, I have some questions for you. He nodded, his expression serious, ready to perform whatever act of contrition he thought I required. Why do you think you are good enough for my daughter? I asked, and I'm not talking about what you can provide for her financially. I want to know what you, as a person, bring to her life. I leaned forward, my gaze unwavering. Tell me about your goals, your work ethic, your character. What do you plan to do now that your father's money is no longer an option? His answers, or lack thereof, revealed exactly what I had suspected. The confident facade crumbled under the weight of direct scrutiny. He had never worked a day in his life. He possessed no marketable skills, no practical experience. His ambitions were vague, formless dreams that had always relied on an endless supply of parental funding. He had been coasting on a potent combination of privilege and good looks, assuming it would be enough to carry him through life forever. He was a hollow man, a beautifully wrapped box with nothing inside. Then I asked him the question that truly mattered, the one that would decide everything. Do you love my daughter for who she is, Brett? Or do you love the idea of having a beautiful girlfriend to accessorize your life, to show off to your wealthy friends? Would you still want to be with her if she had to live in this simple house, with this simple lifestyle for the rest of her life? His hesitation was infinitesimal, a flicker in his eyes, a slight tightening of his lips, but it was all the answer I needed. He couldn't say yes. The lie wouldn't form. In that split second of silence, I saw the truth of his character laid bare. I thanked him for his honesty, my voice devoid of warmth. I told him I'd be in touch about his father's situation. He left looking confused, a seed of doubt finally planted in his overconfident mind, but he was still hopeful. That night, after he was gone, I made a decision that I knew would change everything, not just for him, but for my daughter and for me. The time for subtlety was over. I spent the next week engaged in a quiet, meticulous investigation. I wasn't just looking at Brett's father anymore. I was digging into their entire family situation, using the considerable resources at my disposal. What I discovered was both enlightening and deeply disturbing. The father hadn't just lost his job because my canceled contract was the final straw. He had been on thin ice for months, his file filled with reports of poor performance, missed targets, and whispers of questionable business practices. He had been taking kickbacks from other vendors, a fact my internal audit had just started to uncover. My contract termination had simply accelerated an inevitable and justifiable outcome. The family's financial problems ran far deeper than the loss of single income. They had been living a lie, funding their lavish lifestyle with a mountain of debt. They were leveraged to the hilt, with second mortgages, maxed out credit cards, and high-interest personal loans. The image of wealth they projected to the world was a fragile house of cards, and the father's job had been the only thing keeping it from collapsing. Brett, meanwhile, had been weaving his own web of deceit. I learned from a friend whose son attended the same university that Brett had been telling everyone he was practically engaged to my daughter. He bragged that her father was some kind of highly successful, semi-retired businessman who adored him and fully approved of their relationship. He was shamelessly using my daughter and his fabricated connection to me to boost his own social status, even as he was privately mocking the reality of my life to my face. But the final discovery was the one that made my blood run cold. I learned he had been actively pressuring my daughter to ask me for money. He had spun a manipulative tale, convincing her that if I truly cared about her happiness, I would help support their relationship financially. He had planted the insidious idea in her head that a truly loving father would, without question, want to contribute to her boyfriend's family during their time of need. He was grooming her to see me as a resource to be tapped, a living ATM. My daughter, still completely unaware of my true financial situation, had been agonizing over how to approach me. She had been planning to ask me to take out a loan against my house or dip into what she assumed were my meager retirement savings to bail out the family of the man who despised me. That was it. The final line had been crossed. The charade was over. I called my daughter and told her I was making a special dinner on Friday night. I told her to bring Brett. I had something important to discuss with both of them. Friday evening arrived, cloaked in a tense anticipation. They showed up looking polished and hopeful, a united front ready to receive what they believed would be good news. My daughter kept shooting Brett encouraging glances, her eyes shining with a belief that her simple, kind-hearted father was about to save the day. I served them a simple meal, the same roast chicken from our first disastrous dinner. I had cooked it in the same oven and served on the same plates in the same kitchen they had disdained. But this time, I also laid out a series of documents on the dining table next to the salt and pepper shakers. Financial statements, business records, property deeds, the unvarnished, factual story of my life. I let them finish their meal in relative silence before I began. I started by telling them about my business. I told them about the garage, the 18-hour days, the cot in the office. I explained in calm, measured tones how I had built it from nothing, how it had grown over 25 years, and then I slid a summary of the company's current valuation across the table. I watched their faces as the numbers with many, many zeros, sank in. My daughter's expression cycled through a rapid series of emotions. Shock, then confusion, and then a deep, gut-wrenching hurt. Brett's face was a study in rapid calculation. His surprise quickly morphed into a frantic reassessment. And then, finally, a wave of profound, humiliating embarrassment washed over him. Then, I told him about the contract cancellation. I explained exactly who his father worked for, the history of our business relationship, and the precise, business-first reasons why I had chosen to terminate our agreement. Then I looked Brett dead in the eye and made the connection crystal clear. I told him that his arrogant, disrespectful behavior during our first meeting was the catalyst, the final push I needed to make a decision I had already been considering. His disrespect had made it personal, but his father's own poor performance had made it inevitable. The silence that followed was deafening, heavier and more profound than any I had ever experienced in my home. My daughter was the first to speak, her voice a raw, wounded whisper. Why? Why did you never tell me? About the money, the business, about any of it? The pain in her voice was palpable, and it pierced my heart. I looked at her, my own eyes filled with a sorrow she was only now beginning to understand. I wanted you to learn what really matters, I explained, my voice gentle. I wanted you to understand the value of hard work and humility. I wanted you to learn to judge people by their character, not their bank accounts. I needed you to be proud of who I was as a person, not what I could provide for you materially. Her boyfriend, Brett, was still frantically trying to process the new reality. I could almost see the gears turning in his head as he recalculated everything he thought he knew about me, about Sarah, about their entire relationship. The simple man was gone, replaced by a formidable figure of wealth and power he had completely misjudged. I turned my attention to him, my voice hardening. Your father's unemployment is unfortunate, I said, the words sharp and precise. But it is also a direct consequence of your arrogance and your disrespect. Let me teach you a lesson your own father clearly failed to. Respect isn't something you can buy or inherit. Brett, it's something you earn through your actions and your character. I leaned back in my chair, the architect of this entire painful confrontation. I offered him a choice. You can continue to date my daughter, I said, my gaze flickering to Sarah, but you will have to prove yourself worthy of her. You will get a job. You will learn some humility. You will treat both my daughter and me with the respect we deserve. You will stand on your own 2 feet, without a penny of your family's money or mine. Or you can walk away right now and save us all a great deal of trouble. The ultimatum hung in the air, a challenge he could not possibly meet. The boyfriend's reaction was everything I had expected, and yet it was still shocking in its complete lack of self-awareness. Instead of showing an ounce of remorse or accepting a shred of responsibility, he exploded. A dark, ugly rage contorted his handsome features. He accused me of ruining his family's life out of petty spite. He called me vindictive, manipulative, and cruel. You tricked me, he spat, his voice trembling with fury. You let me believe you were just some poor, simple man, when you were actually wealthy enough to destroy people's lives on a whim. The colossal irony of his accusation was completely lost on him. He then turned to my daughter, his face a mask of betrayal. He gave her an ultimatum of his own. You need to choose, Sarah. It's him or me. Your father is a manipulative, controlling liar. He's been lying to you for your entire life about who he is. He painted me as the villain, the master manipulator in a story where he, the arrogant freeloader, was somehow the innocent victim. I held my breath, my entire relationship with my daughter hanging in the balance. Her response surprised both of us. A quiet strength seemed to fill her. She looked at Brett, her eyes clear and resolute for the first time in months. Leave, she said, her voice soft but unbreakable. Just leave. She told him she'd been thinking a lot over the past week, about the values my father had tried to teach her, about the kind of person she wanted to be, and the kind of people she wanted in her life. She told him that his explosive, entitled reaction to learning the truth about my business told her everything she would ever need to know about his character. A man who truly loved me, she said, her voice gaining strength, would have been happy to discover that my father was successful and secure. But you're not happy. You're angry. You're furious that you were denied the opportunity to look down on him. You're upset because your whole narrative of superiority has been shattered. He stared at her, dumbfounded, unable to comprehend this sudden transformation. He left that night, slamming the door behind him, and I have not seen him since. The story didn't end there. In the weeks that followed, word of the dramatic breakup spread like wildfire through my daughter's social circle. Brett, true to form, had been frantically spinning his own version of events. He painted himself as the tragic victim of a crazy, vindictive businessman who had destroyed his family over a minor disagreement at the dinner table. What he didn't count on was that my daughter's friends, armed with the truth from Sarah, began doing their own research. They were smart, resourceful young people. They discovered the truth about my company's success, about Brett's father's long history of poor performance, and about the real, multifaceted reasons behind the contract termination. The story that emerged painted a very different picture than the one Brett had been telling. His reputation at the university was utterly destroyed. The wealthy friends who had once admired him, who had accepted him based on his family's perceived status, wanted nothing more to do with someone who had been so publicly exposed as an arrogant, disrespectful leech. The girls who had been impressed by his designer clothes and expensive car lost all interest when they learned he'd been living entirely off his father's money while cruelly insulting the very people who had made that lifestyle possible. He became a social pariah. He tried to reach out to my daughter multiple times, his frantic calls and messages filled with desperate apologies and pleas for another chance. She ignored every one of them. He even showed up at our house one afternoon, looking pathetic and lost, but I met him at the door and made it unequivocally clear that he was no longer welcome. About 3 months later, I heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd finally gotten a job. It was nothing glamorous, an entry-level position at a local retail store, stocking shelves and working the cash register. His father had also found new employment, but at a significantly lower salary, in a less prestigious position. The family had been forced to downsize their home, sell their luxury cars, and give up most of the possessions that had once defined them. I felt no satisfaction or joy in hearing about their struggles. I had never wanted to destroy anyone's life. I had simply wanted to teach a hard, necessary lesson about respect and consequences. 6 months have passed since that life-changing dinner. My daughter and I are closer than we have ever been. The painful experience, as difficult as it was, taught both of us invaluable lessons about honesty, values, and what truly matters in this life. She is dating someone new now, a kind, intelligent young man who is working part-time to pay his way through his engineering degree. He drives an old, beat-up Honda, wears clothes from Target, and, most importantly, he treats both my daughter and me with genuine warmth and respect. When I eventually told him about my business, his reaction was one of pure, unadulterated admiration. He congratulated me on building something so successful while managing to stay true to my values. He didn't see dollar signs. He saw a lifetime of hard work. My daughter has also started working part-time at my company. I didn't create some cushy, made-up executive position for her. She works on the factory floor, wearing steel-toed boots and safety glasses, learning the business from the ground up, just as I did. She says she wants to understand what I built, why it matters, and the people whose hard work makes it all possible. She is discovering the profound satisfaction that comes from honest work and earned success. As for her former boyfriend, I heard he eventually transferred to a different school in another state. The social fallout from his behavior had made his situation untenable, and he decided a fresh start was his only option. His father never contacted me directly about the contract termination. I suspect, on some level, he understood that his son's behavior had consequences that extended far beyond a simple business transaction. Some lessons in life are incredibly expensive, but they are also profoundly necessary. I have spent a lot of time reflecting on whether I handled the situation correctly. Could I have been more direct from the very beginning? Should I have told my daughter about my financial success years earlier? Was it wrong of me to intertwine business decisions with personal relationships? In the end, I believe I made the right choices for the right reasons. Respect is non-negotiable. Character matters infinitely more than money. And sometimes, protecting the people you love requires making difficult, even ruthless, decisions. My daughter learned that a person's true worth isn't measured by their bank account or their material possessions. Her former boyfriend learned, in the harshest way possible, that arrogance and disrespect have a price. And I learned that the simple lifestyle I chose was never a reflection of my limitations, but a clear and powerful reflection of my values. The young man who laughed at my modest home and arrogantly promised to take care of my daughter discovered that real security doesn't come from inherited wealth or unearned privilege. It comes from hard work, good character, and earning the respect of the people who matter. I still live in the same house. I still drive the same truck. And I still buy my books used. Not because I have to, but because I choose to. And now my daughter finally understands the difference. That understanding, that shared value system, is worth more to me than all the money in my business accounts combined.